I grew up in a two-story colonial house in suburban Connecticut, the kind with a white picket fence and a picture-perfect family. At least from the outside. Inside, though, things were different. I was the middle child between my older brother Daniel and my younger sister Sophie, and from the time I could speak full sentences, I was known as the emotional one. If I cried when a friend hurt my feelings, I was being dramatic. If I spoke up about something that felt unfair, I was overreacting. I remember once, when I was around 10, I got upset at the dinner table because my brother kept interrupting me and everyone laughed like I was being ridiculous. My mom, Karen, looked at me and said, "Lily, you need to toughen up. The world won't slow down for your feelings." My dad, James, wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. He'd usually just sigh and say, "Not everything is about you, Lily," then turn back to his newspaper. Daniel was the golden child. Good grades, confident, the boy who never cried. Sophie was sweet, agreeable, always trying to keep the peace. And then there was me. Too loud, too sensitive, too much. At school, I gravitated toward books and music. I had a deep well of emotions I didn't know what to do with, so I wrote poetry and played piano in the basement to let it out. But no matter what I did, my family seemed to treat my feelings like a problem to be fixed, not understood. When I told my mom I wanted to be a writer, she rolled her eyes and said, "You mean you want to be broke and dramatic for a living?" Over time, I learned to bottle everything up. I laughed when things hurt. I apologized when I cried. I told myself maybe if I could just be a little more like Daniel or Sophie, maybe then they'd take me seriously. Maybe then I'd matter more. But no matter how much I changed, their labels stuck. Even as I got older, nothing I did seemed to matter as much as how I felt doing it. And they always used that against me. "You're being too emotional, Lily," became the family's go-to excuse to shut me down, no matter how calm or logical I tried to be. It's strange, in a family that preached love and support, I was never allowed to just be who I was. And I didn't know it yet, but this label, the emotional daughter, would eventually be the reason I was cut off entirely. I thought that maybe, if I excelled, if I got straight A's, joined clubs, volunteered, maybe they'd see I wasn't just emotional, I was capable. I pushed myself harder than anyone, hoping to be taken seriously, but every accomplishment was met with a half-hearted, "That's nice, Lily," while Daniel got a full-blown family dinner celebration for being accepted into a state college he barely applied to. At home, things got colder. Whenever I expressed frustration, like when I noticed my chores were double what Sophie did, or when I questioned why I wasn't allowed to go to a sleepover everyone else could attend, I was met with, "Lily, don't start." That phrase became a wall. The moment I heard it, I knew nothing I said would matter. I wasn't being a rebel. I wasn't yelling or slamming doors. I was just asking why the rules felt different for me. But in our house, logic from me was seen as manipulation, and emotion from me was seen as weakness. I was trapped either way. Sophie, bless her heart, tried to be supportive. She'd slip me little notes saying, "I know you're not crazy," or bring me a cookie after I cried in my room. But she never stood up to Mom or Dad, not really. I didn't blame her. It wasn't safe for any of us to challenge the power structure in that house. By junior year, the dynamic was set in stone. Daniel was the leader, Sophie was the peacemaker, and I was the problem. One night during a family dinner, I tried to bring up how stressed I felt with all the pressure I was under, school, college prep, everything. My dad put his fork down and said, "Lily, you always make it about you. Your brother and sister don't complain. Why can't you just be normal?" Normal. That word echoed in my head long after the dishes were cleared. What did normal even mean in a house where pretending everything was fine was the only way to survive? From then on, I stopped sharing anything real. I became a master at smiling through pain, nodding even when I disagreed, being pleasant instead of honest. And they loved me more for it. But I hated myself more with every fake smile I gave. Deep down, I was screaming. And the worst part? No one seemed to hear it. By the time I started college, I had already accepted that I was the outlier in the family. I chose to attend a liberal arts school in Massachusetts, far enough from home to breathe, but close enough that I still hoped they'd visit sometimes. They never did. Daniel got a car and a monthly allowance. Sophie had a college fund waiting for her. I had 2 part-time jobs and a mountain of student loans. I didn't complain. I figured if I worked hard enough, maybe they'd see I wasn't just emotional. I was resilient too. Senior year, I got accepted into a prestigious graduate writing program. It was the kind of opportunity most people only dream of. I was over the moon and terrified. I couldn't afford it on my own. I called my mom one evening. I still remember standing outside the student center rehearsing my words. I wanted to sound mature, calm, responsible. I asked if they could help me cover part of the tuition. Just a loan, I said, not a gift. There was a long pause on the other end. Then her voice came, sharp and decisive. Lily, we don't think it's wise to invest more money into someone who still hasn't figured out how to manage her emotions. I stood there, stunned. I've been working nonstop. I've kept my grades up. I'm not asking for a handout, I said, trying not to cry. Mom sighed. You always think everything is an attack. This is why we worry about you. You're too fragile for the real world. I couldn't speak. I felt like I was 12 again, being told to stop crying over dinner. Then she added, Daniel's starting his own business. We've decided to support that instead. It's a better long-term investment. And just like that, I was officially cut off. It wasn't about money. It was about what it symbolized. I wasn't part of their vision of success, of pride, of legacy. I was the emotional daughter, the liability. I hung up without saying goodbye. For the first time in years, I let myself fall apart. I cried the whole walk back to my apartment, not just because I felt abandoned, but because, deep down, I realized something I hadn't dared admit before. They never really saw me. They saw a burden, a complication, someone to manage, not support. And that night, for the first time, I stopped trying to win them over. After my parents cut me off, I didn't cry right away. I went numb. For weeks, I worked double shifts at the bookstore cafe and stayed up late trying to figure out how to make grad school happen. Loans, scholarships, second jobs. Nothing added up. The acceptance letter sat on my desk like a cruel joke, reminding me what I almost had. I didn't tell anyone at first. I was embarrassed. I kept thinking, maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too emotional, too intense. My parents made me question everything about myself. If the people who raised me couldn't support me, what did that say about me? It wasn't until I broke down in the back room at work that someone finally saw through the mask. Jasmine, my coworker, found me sitting on the floor crying into a cold coffee cup. She didn't ask questions. She just sat next to me, handed me a tissue, and said, "Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone." That was the first time in a long time I felt safe saying the truth out loud. I told her everything, how I was always labeled the emotional one, how my family used that as a reason to push me away, how they refused to help me take the next step in life simply because I felt too much. Jasmine didn't roll her eyes. She didn't say I was being dramatic. She listened, really listened. Then she told me about her own experiences with family, therapy, and how unlearning old wounds takes time. She gave me the number of her therapist and told me, "You don't have to be fixed, you just need to be heard." I didn't believe her at first, but I made the call anyway. Therapy wasn't a magical fix, but it was the first place I didn't have to apologize for feeling. I talked about everything: my childhood, my parents, my confusion, my anger, my sadness, and slowly, I began to see a pattern. It wasn't me. It was how they were raised. It was their fear of emotions, of vulnerability, passed down like a family heirloom. I had inherited it too, but I didn't have to keep it. With Jasmine's support, I started freelancing, writing articles, editing papers, anything I could find online. Slowly but surely, I scraped enough together to defer grad school, then reapply the following year with new funding. It wasn't the plan I started with, but it was mine. Every dollar, every essay, every therapy session, mine. And for the first time in my life, being emotional wasn't something I had to hide. It was something I could build from. At first, writing was just therapy. I kept a journal, filling page after page with things I couldn't say out loud. Old memories, quiet grief, unspoken rage. It was messy and raw and completely unfiltered. But it felt good. It felt true. Jasmine encouraged me to share one of my pieces online. "There are more people like you than you think," she said. I hesitated at first. I worried people would judge me the way my family did, call me dramatic, accuse me of oversharing. But late one night, I uploaded a short essay called "Raised to be Quiet, Labeled Loud." I didn't expect much, maybe a few clicks, a pity like or two. But the next morning, my inbox was full. Dozens of strangers had read it, and not only did they get it, they felt it. Messages came pouring in. "This is my story too. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for putting this into words." For the first time, being emotional wasn't something to apologize for. It was a bridge connecting me to people who had been silenced the same way I had. I kept writing. More essays, more truth. I created a blog called The Quiet Rebellion. I wrote about being the emotional daughter, about family expectations, about healing from invisible wounds. I didn't hold back. I wrote the things I wished someone had said to me when I was 14, 18, 22. And people listened. Within a year, my blog had thousands of subscribers. A well-known mental health nonprofit reached out asking if I'd speak at one of their community events. At first, I nearly said no. Me? A speaker? But Jasmine reminded me, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." So I stood on that stage, heart pounding, hands shaking, and I told my story. I talked about the dinner table silences, the eye rolls, the moment I was cut off, and I ended with the line, "They told me I was too much, but maybe I was just enough for the life I was meant to build." The audience stood up, some were crying, so was I. Afterward, someone asked if I ever planned to turn my story into a book. The idea had always been there, hidden under fear and doubt, but now, I finally believed it was worth sharing. And so I did. I wrote every night after work, sometimes until dawn. The manuscript became my therapy, my closure, my proof. Not just that I had survived, but that I had grown. I used to think my emotions were my flaw. Now they were my fuel. By the time my book was published, things had shifted. I had a modest following online, regular freelance work, and speaking engagements booked months in advance. For the first time in my life, I felt grounded. Not just emotionally, but financially, professionally. I was finally building a life that made sense to me. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from my mother. I hadn't heard her voice in almost 3 years. My first instinct was that something bad had happened. But her tone was casual. Almost too casual. "Hi, Lily. I saw something about your book on Facebook. Looks like you've been busy," she said, as if we'd spoken just last week. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, unsure how to respond. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said, "So, your brother Daniel is thinking about changing careers. He's interested in writing, maybe nonprofit work too. Do you think you could help him connect with some of your people?" I felt the breath leave my body. There it was. No, I'm proud of you. No, I'm sorry for the years of silence. Just a request. For my platform, my contacts, my success. I could barely get the words out. "You cut me off." She chuckled softly. "Oh, Lily, that was so long ago. Don't be so emotional about it. Families move past things." There it was again. That word. Emotional, used like a weapon, a tool to shut me down, to erase the pain she had caused. I swallowed hard. No, I won't help Daniel, and this isn't about being emotional, it's about boundaries. Her tone changed instantly. "I see success has made you bitter?" "No," I said quietly, "success made me clear." I hung up the phone and sank to the floor. Not because I was hurt, but because I was done. Done hoping they'd change. Done wishing for an apology that would never come. Done waiting to be seen by people who refused to see me unless there was something in it for them. It hurt, of course it did, but for the first time, I didn't question myself. I knew my worth now. I knew what I'd built, and I knew who I had become. And I wasn't going to let anyone, especially the people who discarded me, claim a single piece of it. After that call with my mother, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy, like I'd just walked away from a house fire with no burns but the smell of smoke still clinging to my skin. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want distance for the sake of being cold. I just wanted peace. So, I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I stopped trying to earn love from people who only offered it conditionally. I didn't block my family. I didn't send angry texts or post dramatic updates. I just quietly let go. I stopped reaching out. I stopped waiting for apologies. I stopped holding space in my heart for people who had no intention of showing up for me fully. It hurt, but it also healed. With that space cleared, something unexpected happened. I made room for people who loved me as I am. Jasmine remained my anchor, my chosen family. Through her, I met others, friends who didn't flinch when I cried, who asked questions instead of shutting me down, who laughed loudly and hugged tightly and meant it. And then there was Sophie. One day, out of the blue, she messaged me. "I've been reading your blog," she wrote. "I didn't know how much you were carrying. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." That message hit harder than I expected. We met for coffee not long after. She sat across from me, nervous, fidgeting with her sleeves. "I didn't protect you," she said. "I should have. But I was scared." I looked at her, not as the peacekeeper of our childhood, but as a woman trying to do better, and I saw honesty in her eyes. "I forgive you," I told her. "But more than that, I'm glad you're here now." We didn't rebuild overnight. But brick by brick, we started laying down something real. Not a forced closeness, not guilt-driven contact, just two people choosing each other, intentionally, day by day. And I realized something powerful. Boundaries aren't about pushing people out. They're about making space for what's real. I still have moments where I feel that old ache, that longing for a mother's embrace, a father's pride. But I've stopped punishing myself for wanting those things. Instead, I remind myself of what I've built. A life rooted in truth. Relationships that are mutual, not performative. A self that is whole, not waiting to be fixed. And, for the first time, I no longer need my family's approval to feel worthy. Because I've already come home to myself. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the early mornings, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the quiet street I now call home. It's a modest neighborhood in Massachusetts, nothing fancy. But to me, it's everything. Because I built it. Not just the house, but the life inside it. I wrote my second book last year. It's called The Power of Feeling Deeply. It's about what it means to grow up in a world that punishes sensitivity, especially in women. And how, through all of that, we can still turn our pain into something useful, something true. It hit the bestseller list in its first month. But that's not the part I'm proudest of. What I'm proud of is that every word came from a place of truth. From the little girl who cried too easily, from the teenager who was told she was too much, from the woman who was cut off, shut down, and still found her voice anyway. I get emails every week from women, daughters, mothers, sisters, who tell me my story sounds like theirs. Some are still in the thick of it, some have walked away, others are just beginning to realize that they deserve better. And to all of them, I say the same thing. You are not too much, you are exactly enough. There's a photo on my bookshelf. Me at age 10, messy hair, gap-toothed smile, clutching a notebook like it held the secrets of the universe. I keep it there to remind myself she was never broken. She was never wrong for feeling. She just lived in a world that didn't know how to hold her. And now, I know how to hold myself. Some people might still say I'm too emotional, that I think too much, cry too much, care too much. Let them. Because the truth is, I do feel deeply. I always have. That's not a flaw. That's my gift. And for anyone who's been made to feel ashamed for their tenderness, their tears, their truth, I want them to know you are not alone, and you never were.